Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So, as most of you probably know, I'm an atheist. Well, maybe I should say I was an atheist, because I think I've witnessed a miracle, and it has me questioning whether there are some supernatural powers beyond our knowing out there in the universe.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the Living Dead.
It's a pretty interesting miracle too, but before I get to that, I need to go into a bit of a backstory. Trust me, this is going to be worth the wait. But I think it's only fair I go into a bit of a backstory in case some of you are new viewers and you missed these videos from 2 years ago. Or alternatively, maybe you've been a long-term subscriber and you did watch those videos. I think it's good if I give you a little bit of a recap, a little bit of a reminder of the events from a year and a half to 2 years ago. So, our story starts late 2015, in which I did my first ever hangout with the skeptic feminists. I think it went for about an hour. It was a light, enjoyable conversation, and I think we agreed on most things and got along perfectly well. But after that hangout, someone using the name OG Feminazi left a comment in the comment section. This is the person who would go on to be known as Dawn. Now, Dawn took issue with some of the things I said, even though I thought I was quite reasonable in that hangout. And she started chatting to the skeptic feminists, and they became friends, and they got Dawn on to do a hangout with them.
So I guess I've come to know of the MRA and their arguments mostly from watching responses to them and not actually watching their videos. In all fairness, I can't stomach it.
Now, Dawn claims to have worked in domestic abuse shelters, I think for 30 years or close to 30 years, something like that. So it was the perfect opportunity for the skeptic feminist to have a chat to someone who's, doing legitimate feminist work, is actually boots on the ground helping women every day, right? I would think that there would be a lot to talk about on that particular topic.
But the men that were involved were the Paul Elams of the world, who feel like bash a violent bitch is a good thing to say, and if they walk across a woman getting raped, they're not going to help her. That kind of mentality.
I would think there's a lot to discuss about how shelters work and some of the women who come in there and some of their stories, which they did touch on, but unfortunately they spent most of the 4 hours and 42 minutes. Yes, that's right, it went for 4 hours and 42 minutes, shitting on MRAs.
Oh, and that's where I wonder if it is worth having a conversation with them at all. And I think you and I have gone back and forth a little bit in the comments about this. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much value it is to keep giving. I'm trying to be, because I trying to learn from you and not lump all the MRAs together in one evil group. But since they're not willing to weed out their really awful, horrible members, I can't see what purpose it has in having conversations with them, because they won't even just admit that there is a violence problem.
And Dawn made quite a few claims which were, let's say, very suspicious, with absolutely no evidence to back them up at all. So I did a reply to this, a 2-hour reply. Just on a side note, folks, I got to say, I really do earn my Patreon money, not to give myself a pat on the back, But I sat through that 4 hours and 42 minutes more than once in making that 2-hour video. And trust me, that was fucking torture. So I appreciate my Patreons for giving me money, because it allows me to buy alcohol and numb myself to the pain of listening to 4 hours and 42 minutes of inane rambling about how bad MRAs are, with absolutely no fucking evidence to back it up whatsoever. And trust me, I did ask for evidence and never got any. But anyway, like I said, I did a 2-hour response, pulling apart some of the juicier claims made by Dawn. And I got quite an angry response from Russian Deadpool, who, not surprisingly, came to her defense.
Anyway, we appreciate Bane's insistence on specifying which feminists he has a problem with, at least in the beginning. That's really intellectually honest of him. Unfortunately, blatantly asserting Dawn is a liar is not. Dawn works very hard, and has put her heart and spirit into the work she does, and has done over the years. During her time doing this work, she has talked to men who have been abused. Some she has talked successfully out of suicide. She had men sobbing on the phone, threatening to blow their heads off. She has had women on the phone getting assaulted as she tried to figure out how to get them help. She had been chased off the road by angry ex-partners of women she attended courts with. She has been in a literal wrestling match with a gang who were trying to pull a woman out of the shelter while she was trying to get her safely inside without jeopardizing any of the women and children already there. She has thrown a burning chair out of the kitchen emergency door because a little boy had found a lighter in his mom's purse and wanted to burn the shelter down so he could go home. She has held a mentally ill woman who saw bugs on the wall and tried to cut her wrist with a plastic knife because she wanted to die rather than see her visions and deal with the abuse she had faced for an entire lifetime. Because what happens to the mentally ill in our society is fucking despicable. She has calmed down a distraught 7-year-old girl who didn't know that Santa was, and curled up in a corner of the kitchen with a knife because she had heard that a man coming in the night, and was so terrified of men coming in the night to rape her that she was terrified of Santa. We are not historians. We are not making documentaries. These are human pieces with real emotion.
Because after all, Dawn is a feminist icon, right? She's this hard-working feminist helping these poor defenseless women in domestic abuse shelters. Or is she? And I did a reply to that, and Dawn also left a long rambly comment in my comment section, which I also replied to in a video. In fact, you'll find all these videos in a playlist which I'll link below. Just in case you haven't seen them and you want to go through them, I highly recommend it, despite the fact you're getting the short version here. So when I was doing my reply to Dawn's long rambly comment in my comment section, I did a little bit of research. I had been looking around at various comments in comment sections of these videos, both mine and the videos from the Skeptic Feminist, and I noticed a strange thing. There was another commenter who had used the exact same argument that Dawn had used, and it was a strange argument. It wasn't a common argument. In fact, I'd never heard anyone else use it before. And the use of language and the way she didn't break things up in paragraphs and a couple of other things struck me as being very similar to Dawn. And I did a little bit more digging, and I found that this other commenter was in fact from Canada, just like Dawn, and had a daughter, just like Dawn. And it suddenly dawned on me, excuse the pun, that this other commenter was actually Dawn using a sock puppet. She was going around and using an alias to back up her original account. You know, nothing dishonest about that, right? So I put forward these arguments in a video presenting evidence and basically said, I don't have any conclusive proof, but I'll let you make up your own minds based on what's here. And surprise, surprise, within 24 hours of putting that video up, both accounts disappeared. I'm sure that's just a coincidence though, right? And after that, Dawn pretty much disappeared, apart from one or two appearances, which I'll get to in a minute. But the interesting thing is, when I was doing that research on Dawn and looking through comments, I discovered that she was a TERF, a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. And what's interesting about that is the skeptic feminists absolutely fucking hate TERFs. They despise TERFs, yet this feminist that they were holding up as this shining light of the feminist movement, this hard-working, boots-on-the-ground icon, that everyone should admire, turned out to be a fucking TERF, which I just found hilarious. Months later, I think Russian Deadpool came to me and said, I just found out that Dawn's a TERF. Yeah, I'd known that months earlier, dude. A little bit slow on the uptake, maybe. But anyway, this led to Dawn doing a hangout or two. I can't remember if it was one or two, with Equal Rights Advocate, who's a good friend and a long-time subscriber to my channel. In fact, I put Equal Rights Advocate in contact with the skeptic feminists so they could do the hangout together. Now, Dawn's next appearance after that was a year and a half ago, and that particular hangout was called Dawn Questions for RadFems Live. Now, the date of that recording was October 14, 2016. Keep that in mind. And this particular hangout was billed as the final hangout that Dawn will ever do. And the reason why is because poor Dawn, poor tragic Dawn, was dying of a terminal illness with only 1 month to live.
Exciting thing ever. Anyway, we are today joined by one of our most esteemed guests that we've had on many times before. Her name is Dawn. She has a long history of working in domestic violence shelters, and she is a radical feminist. This will be the final chat that we have with her. I don't know if she wants to go into talking about why that is, but I want to say right off the bat, it's been an honor to know you. And she has a slideshow to present.
Alluding back to how we started the conversation with this being our last chat is I lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys. Do you remember what I was?
Yeah, you were talking about why this is our last chat.
Yeah, and why feminism is so needed is that I'm sick and dying. And part of the reason for that is a lifetime of these things happening. I'm sorry, I'm trying really hard not to cry. This is the life women lead in my country, where it's supposed to be equal. And
so tragic. I'm getting a little bit upset. Yes, poor Dawn. This compulsive liar who constantly lied over and over and over again, as I've proven in many videos, now was claiming to be dying with only 1 month to live. So tragic. Now, needless to say, some of us off-air speculated that maybe Dawn isn't really dying, right? Maybe this is just more bullshit from this compulsive liar. And I do think that this woman has some kind of psychological issue where she can't tell the truth, right? That is how bad she is, as you will see. And trust me, this gets a lot worse. But we listened to Dawn for almost 2 hours, just ramble on insanely, and she's very, very hard to listen to because she just goes off on fucking insane tangents, and you just lose track of what she's saying. Yeah. So, like I said, that was October 14th, 2016. And then on October 20, 2016, the Skeptic Feminist put up a video called Male Victim of DV on Duluth Model, because they had received an email at YouTube, if I remember correctly, from a male victim of domestic abuse, who went on to say that he didn't really see a need for male shelters, because as a male, from his male perspective, and as someone who's been through domestic abuse, he can say that, you know, he didn't really need the shelter, and that shelters should be just for women. That's where all the resources should go. Now, as I was listening to Russian Deadpool read this letter, it suddenly dawned on me that I knew who the writer of this letter was. The syntax was a dead giveaway, and then towards the end, she let slip a couple of things, which in my mind really cemented the fact that this was Dawn pretending to be a male victim of domestic abuse so she could undermine male victims of domestic abuse and MRAs. Now remember, this is someone who's claimed to have worked in domestic abuse for 30 years and to actually give a shit about men and male victims. Evidently not. Now once again, I did a video on this presenting all the evidence that I collected to show what an absolute scumbag this person is. What kind of fucking person pretends to be a male victim just so they can undermine male victims? Fucking scumbag. And that was the last we ever heard of Dawn. And in that time, occasionally myself and some others off air have speculated, I wonder if Dawn actually died, or whether that was just more lies from this compulsive fucking liar who quite possibly has never said anything that's actually fucking true. She really is that bad, trust me, as you will see. So anyway, I wake up this morning and I'm having my morning coffee, and I did my daily search for terms men's rights and MRA on YouTube just to see what's out there. And I noticed that RadFem man-hating turf mancheeze had done a live hangout within the last 24 hours. Now, in case you don't know who mancheeze is, she is an insane Canadian radical feminist, trans-hating, man-hating lunatic who herself has used many, many different names over the years. She has a long history of hyperbole and insane argument on YouTube. In fact, in my Propaganda of Toxic Feminism series, I caught her out editing various videos out of context. She had edited bits out and then presented them as if there was no edits.
Let me ask you something, Tom. There is, I think, in me, I would bet in you, and in most men, there is still, despite the fact that I can't find a rational argument against this, I can't, no matter how hard I try. I don't think a team of Harvard attorneys can really find a rational argument for this, given what we consider concepts like equality under the law and things like that. If you take those things into account, then you cannot conclude that it's at all constitutional or fair to make a man responsible for a child, whether he has a say in it or not. That's just indentured servitude. But there is still, in myself personally, and I think in most men, even though the logic of this is absolutely impeccable, and even though men are supposed to be logical creatures that make rational decisions, there is still this little at the idea that we would just look at a woman who's sitting there, maybe tears running down her cheeks, saying, I'm pregnant, and for the guy to be able to say, well, fuck you.
Right.
And that is pretty much what I'm advocating here, that men should have the right to do.
Yes.
Whether it's nice or friendly or not, but they're still part of us, and I think that's part of what keeps this crazy system alive. What do you think that is in men, that where they can see something that is obviously logical and then still have this reservation, this sadness, guilt, shame about pursuing what really makes sense?
So, yeah, this is another absolute scumbag. So, I'm listening to this hangout, which was recorded May 27, 2018. So, that I listened to it this morning, and it was recorded within 24 hours of that time period. I'm listening to it, and there's a very, very familiar voice. And I think to myself, I'm pretty sure I know that voice. And it suddenly dawns on me, excuse the pun, it suddenly dawns on me that sounds like Dawn. Our dear departed dead Dawn. Our dear departed compulsive liar, radical feminist Dawn. Back from the dead after a year and a half. And I thought to myself, it's a fucking miracle. Here I've been an atheist for all these years, and it seems I'm wrong, because Dawn has come back from the dead. But to be 100% sure this was her, I paused the video and I went and found the original hangout she did with Russian Deadpool, and I compared the voices. And let's just say I was 100% convinced. Here's a clip from both. I'll let you make up your own minds as to whether it's the same person or not.
All right, so tell me your story.
Well, going back a few years before I really knew about all of this stuff, I used to work in a lab where we did like different medical tests. So one day I had a trans client come in, but under no circumstance was I prepared for or warned ahead of time. This person had a female health card with a female name, but something was just off. And it was a kind of test where she needed to get undressed. So I left the room for that to happen, and when I came back, the bra was sitting like right up on top of all of the clothes, and it was obviously stuffed. And I thought to myself, this is really weird, because every woman I've ever come into this room, they all have their underwear hidden. It's, you know, when you listen to them, even the 5 hours you people sat through, I don't know how, but kept getting cut off, and all they want to do is just toss the insult. They said they developed specifically in opposition to shelters and the work that we do, and trying to end it, because the men that started this had been all through the court system, that had restraining orders against them, had put women in shelters, and they congregated together and started attacking the shelter under the guise of men's rights and under the guise of society not being fair to them.
I also found some comments from her new account, and it seems that just like Dawn, this new person also comes from Canada. I guess that's just another coincidence though, right? But I have to ask the question, what kind of scumbag goes on a hangout with people who she considers to be close friends, who she says she admires, who she says she's a massive fan of, right? Goes on a hangout with them and claims that she's dying, that she's got a month to live. They were upset that she was dying, right? And here she is a year and a half later, by some miracle, still alive. What a fucking scumbag. What an absolute fucking scumbag this person is. And I have to say, I was always skeptical as to whether she had worked in domestic abuse or not. I'd always suspected that she might have made up the entire thing, but couldn't prove it one way or the other. But after this returning from the dead bullshit, I have to say, I don't believe it. And she's talking about working in the medical field on the mancheeze hangout. So I guess at least one of those stories is bullshit. Quite possibly both. Now, I did consider leaving a comment for mancheeze to read, but I don't really see the point. she's not going to believe anything I say, and she's just going to say I'm an MRA misogynist, and dismiss it outright. And I kind of find it funny that she's taken this compulsive lying lunatic under her wing. Mind you, I guess it's hard to determine which one of those two is worse.
Before we get into discussing all of that, I just kind of wanted to give a synopsis of my own personal life. And because I think sometimes people who haven't experienced what it's like to be a woman in this society are sometimes missing the overall point of how unsafe it can be for girls and women.
And before you get started on that, just real quick, you still haven't pulled up the PowerPoint, just so you know.
Oh, yeah, I took it down. Okay. I ran out of relevant slides.
Oh, okay. All right. Please continue then. I guess people will be stuck looking at my face since your screen is just red.
Aw, you're beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
Better your mug than mine. Anyway, so what I wanted to just do is just kind of paint a picture of a day in the life of women in this society. So for my own personal self, I was born, as I've told many times, into this very strict religious household by my mother, but my dad was an atheist. So it was a bizarre mix to grow up in, having two extremes. But when I was born, way back in the early 70s, my mom and dad didn't have medical coverage. It wasn't available in Canada at that time. And they were also never given sex education. So they didn't know how not to get pregnant. And so right after I was born, 1 year later, my twin sisters were born. So my mom had two pregnancies back to back. And because I also had a 3-year-old brother at that time, they were dirt poor and they didn't have any resources. They couldn't pay a babysitter or whatever. So my brother and I were handed off to an uncle because he just volunteered to help, and that's his sister, and of course I'll help you. But as it turned out, he has raped every female in my family. And for me personally, I was given to him between 6 and 9 months old, and that's when my own personal abuse started. I was an infant, and I came to find out this information after my mother died, and it was in her journal. And I don't even really know exactly what one could do to a 6 to 9 month old baby, but that's how early it can start. And because it happened so very early in my life, it kind of wears out your fight or flight system when you've, been in that environment and you're fighting for your life constantly. There's a limited supply and eventually it runs out. So as I grew older, I didn't have the ability to recognize the bad guys. And we all know that those bad guys pretty much have some sort of radar where they can pick out victims fairly quickly based on whatever. So after that year and a half, 2 years with my uncle, I was then having to visit my grandparents an awful lot, and I had sexual abuse from my grandfather as well. And that lasted till I was 12 and refused to ever go again. Then it became the dating age, and because I'd had so much abuse and I couldn't recognize what was a good person or a bad person. I couldn't recognize what loving behavior looked like. So I picked really abusive people, and it led me into a 10-year marriage to a horribly violent man. And it ended with me being held hostage for 3 days in our home. I wasn't permitted to leave. I wasn't permitted to eat. I wasn't permitted to sleep. I couldn't think. Like, everywhere I went, he would follow me screaming through the house. And I still to this day don't quite know. I'm not religious, but if I ever believed in a miracle, it was a miracle that I got out of that house alive. It ended up that all of my clothes were ripped up and thrown into our swimming pool. And I couldn't call 911 because every phone in the house had been smashed. And anytime I tried to get to the door, it would just escalate things much further. And then eventually I got locked outside of my house with not a stitch of clothing on. And finally I was able to get back in through a window. I mean, I wasn't going to go knock on my neighbor's door or go anywhere without my clothes on. And eventually I was able to get into the car and get away. He claimed that I ran him over deliberately and tried to have me charged with attempted murder. And thankfully I had a very good police detective who listened and had been around the block a few times and knew. You know, he said he doesn't have any bruises on him. He's walking fine. There's no neighbors saying, oh yeah, we watched our back up 3 times and run him over. So he refused to even entertain the idea. Then the case goes to the Crown Attorney, which is in our country probably what would it be similar to you? Your prosecutor, the main prosecutor. So that person had a decision to make as to whether charges would be dropped or go on to court. And they were dropped because I was married to him and I must have wanted to be there. And the infuriating part of that is that any of those things that he did, if he'd done them to a stranger, it wouldn't even be a question. During my teen years too, I was also preyed upon by older men, and that happens a lot to young girls. I worked at a corner store, and the guy that delivered our excuse me, the guy that delivered our daily newspapers dragged me into the back room and started trying to assault me, and luckily somebody happened to come in and stop it. So I've had an entire life of, and that's not counting all of the times that women are walking down the street and made to feel unsafe because some creep is following you a little too closely. And we've all had it where we get yelled at. I worked at a convenience store overnight in a big city, and the amount of abusive, scary moments, they just start to be background noise. You stop thinking that this is wrong. Women just kind of get used to having to live this way of, you know, always having your keys in your hand and always being on the lookout for the dangerous thing that you know is coming around the corner, because all of these things keep happening to you in your life as a woman, and you understand that these predators can pick you out. And my experience of all of this, I could go on. I could list probably 100 other offenses that have been directed my way, and this is the life women lead in our society. That's why it's rape culture. Just the other day, I took a cab into town. I'm sick and I'm not permitted to drive, so I have to take cabs into town. And I had a problem with the first company because one of the drivers refused to leave me alone. He kept calling me princess. He kept trying to kiss me, and the company refused to do anything about it. So I changed to a different company where I kind of sort of knew someone, and they recently had a hiring on with a bunch of new drivers. So I called the company, and the driver shows up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I get to meet you finally." And I was puzzled by the word finally because I'd never met him before, and to my knowledge, how would he even know anything about me to want to meet me? So I asked him, "What do you mean, finally?" And he told me that, "Oh, you know how guys are. When we don't have fairs, we all meet in a parking lot until we have another fair. And during those fair meetings on their breaks and whatever, they started making bets as to who could get me to sleep with them first. The guy said, 'Oh, you're such a beautiful woman, and we talk about you all the time.' And I'm like, okay, this is why I'm a radical feminist. Like, my God, how much of this do I have to take? I can't even take a cab to the emergency room without worrying about a bunch of assholes doing rape culture live and in action. It's disgusting. The other day, my daughter was grocery shopping, and she was looking at, I don't know, fruits or vegetables, whatever, and a guy comes up beside her with really baggy shorts on, puts his hand down his pants, and starts masturbating in front of her. These things happen to women every single day. Like, ask your women friends. If you're an anti-feminist and you don't think feminism is necessary, start talking to your female people and start asking them what they experience in their lives. And ask them specifically, because it becomes the background of your life, and you just try to stop paying attention to it, and you don't realize that it's having an effect on you.
I mean, with this kind of mindset and this kind of so there is a
mancheeze.
Yeah.
You've been following the men's rights stuff in Canada for a long time. Well,
Yeah.
the men's rights movement. I remember when they first started kind of getting some notoriety and some press coverage. Now that was going back probably like 20 years ago, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the Jordan Peterson, I can't deny that he has young Canadian male fans, do you think that he's a logical outpouring of that, like, almost Paul Elam-ish?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's been featured on A Voice for Men, and Paul Elam runs A Voice for Men.
Oh, that's right.
So all of this men's rights stuff, Peterson is well versed because he's been on the men's rights message boards. He's friends with the leader of the largest men's rights group in Canada, Justin Trottier.
Yeah.
So, and he knew Justin Trottier before Trottier became the leader of the men's rights group in Canada.
I also think there was a dangerous element to them that I could see them, like I said, going back 25 years ago when it kind of started collecting each other's stories about having to pay child support or whatever. But way back then, I thought there was sort of a dangerous growth in that was very subtle, and most people today, you can't even explain to them that there's a men's rights and how kind of scary they can actually be when they get together.
And you have to understand, too, that the alt-right, which is kind of like the big group in America at the moment, they're infused. Like men's rights activists make up a huge portion of the alt-right. Like it's all interweaved. The misogyny and the racism, they all come together into this one big group.
Yes, and they did use YouTube to proliferate, you know, all their messages. So Jordan Peterson just hooked on that, and he immediately became famous when he made this scandal about Bill C-16, because they just like he had the support, you know.
Yes. Yeah, he got big off of the whole C-16 thing, and that's when the alt-right in America picked him up. But the thing is, it's not like we don't have misogynist racists in Canada, because we do, but they're a much
we just
smaller.
Don't usually parade them.
Right, we have a much smaller percentage of them, and we don't parade them, we don't reward them, we don't give them airtime on the CBC. We pretty much just ignore them.
Did you see the CBC try and explain incels?
Oh, geez.
Oh, my God. What happened?
It was horrible.
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, the CBC doesn't know how to do anything but animal stories for the most part. You know, I mean, seriously, the CBC is a joke when it tries to do any kind of serious investigative journalism. The incel thing was terrible. I think they did do one or two little segments on men's rights activists, but it happened to be Roosh coming to Canada. That was the big thing. They did a segment on him.